everyone, I'm Ellie Eberts and welcome to part 1 of my Cafe Mew Mew Uniform build log. Today we are going to be working on the Cafe Mew Mew Apron, which honestly is one of the cutest parts of this outfit. I didn't like this part of the outfit when I first started making them, just because of these puffy heart shapes that the aprons are in. It kind of looks unrealistic when it's drawn and like it should almost be pillow-like, but if you put a pillow in front of your hips like that, it's just gonna look really awkward. So I had to do some brainstorming to figure out how to make this heart-shaped apron look cute and adorable in real life, and I think I figured it out. So stay tuned to learn how I made the heart-shaped apron. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, before we get started, I just want to let you all know that if you don't like learning from videos, I also have a written tutorial on my website, ellieeberts.com. I know that not everyone learns the same way, and while some people might learn awesomely from a video, others like to have written tutorials with detailed instructions. So I'm doing my best to provide both of those options so that way you can learn in whatever way best suits you. So once again, that is ellieeberts.com, and I'll leave a direct link to the tutorial in the description below. So now we can go ahead and get started. The first thing you're going to need is to gather all of your materials. You're going to need about 1.5 to 2 yards of plain white cotton. I used some really inexpensive quilting cotton. You could also use Kona cotton if you wanted your apron to be a bit more substantial. Both options are awesome. You're also going to need 1 to 2 yards of medium weight interfacing. This is just for stability, as well as some snaps and of course thread and scissors. So here we go. First thing we're going to do is cut out all of our pieces. The pieces for this uniform are pretty simple. It's all based around long squares or rectangles. The first piece we're going to cut out will be 5 strips of cotton that are 3.5 inches wide by your waist measurement. So for me, these are 3.5 inches wide and about 32 to 34 inches long. You're gonna wanna leave a little extra length so that way you can finish everything off nicely. We're also going to cut out 2 rectangles for our front chest piece. These are going to be 10 inches tall, 6.5 inches wide at the bottom, and 8 inches wide at the top. I've also cut out 2 strips that are 8 inches wide by 44 inches long, which is the regular width of a cotton. So you can just cut a strip of your cotton that's 8 inches wide and then tear it to create a really clean edge. I'm also going to cut out 2 strips that are 4 inches wide by 44 inches long. These longer strips are going to become our ruffles. Now the last pieces I cut out were pieces for my heart. I cut out 2 copies of my heart pattern, and then I also cut out 1 rectangle that was maybe 1.5 times as wide as my heart and just as tall. That's going to become the puffy part of the heart. Before we begin sewing, you're going to want to interface some of your pieces. I added interfacing to 1 of my chest rectangles as well as to 2 of my straps, which are those 3.5 inch wide strips. This way, you're just gonna have a little bit more stability when you're sewing everything together. We're going to start by creating the top of our apron. I'm taking my 2 chest rectangles, placing them on top of each other, right sides together, and stitching along the top edge, which is that 8 inch wide edge. We're going to just stitch that together with a nice clean straight stitch and then iron it open. You might notice that I have 3 of these chest rectangles on my workbench right now. I'm making 3 aprons for my group, so I'm just kind of doing it all at the same time. Once you've made that stitch, we're going to go ahead and understitch. Understitching will keep your lining from popping out over the top, and it will keep everything nice and secure. So we're going to stitch our seam allowance onto the interfaced side of our chest piece. Now again, once this is stitched, go ahead and iron it in place. So now your 2 chest pieces are touching each other and you just have a nice clean edge at the top. Next, we're going to create the straps for our tops. But before we do that, we have to create the ruffles. We're going to take our 2 8 inch wide by 44 inch long strips, fold those in half and give them a nice pressing. This will give us a clean edge on our ruffle. After that, we're going to run 2 basting stitches along the entire raw edge of this ruffle. Now, using our basting stitches, we can go ahead and ruffle this into place. You're going to want your ruffle to be 20 inches long in the end, so we're making it about half the length that it originally was. Once your ruffle is ready, we can go ahead and pin this onto our strap. I'm using one of my interfaced straps to stitch on the ruffles. This is again for added stability so everything stays nicely in place. I'm going to mark the center of the strap and the center of the ruffle and pin those places together, and then I'm going to go ahead and pin the rest of the ruffle down the edge of my strap. When you get to the end of your ruffle, you're going to want to slowly kind of fade out your ruffle as you're pinning it into place. So rather than lining up the edge of your ruffle with the edge of your strap, you're going to slowly move the edge of your ruffle off the edge of your strap and pin less and less of your ruffle onto the strap, if that makes sense. There's not really any mathematical way to do this. You just want to eyeball it and make sure that both edges of your ruffle are the same. With our ruffle in place, we're going to go ahead and sandwich it between another one of our strap pieces. This is one of the non-interfaced straps. So we are going to sandwich this together and then stitch down the entire length of our strap. Now that that's been stitched into place, go ahead and trim off any of your extra seam allowance, such as that little bit of ruffle where we faded it out at the end. Once that's been stitched into place, go ahead and iron out your ruffle and your strap. We are going to iron this so the two pieces of strap are opposing each other, and then you've just got the ruffle here. This way we can understitch, again, one of my favorite things, understitching. We're going to understitch the ruffle to the interfaced strap. So again, you're going to stitch that seam allowance onto the interfaced side of your strap, and this is just going to keep everything in place so nothing is popping out as you're wearing it. Now we can go ahead and iron these like you normally would. So now we have your ruffle popping out the edges of a nice finished strap. Of course, you're going to want to do that same process for the other strap. And once both your straps are ready, we can go ahead and attach them to our top. To attach our ruffles to our top, we are simply going to line them up with the edge of our top piece and use 1/2 inch seam allowance to stitch these together. Now, something important to note is that when I was putting these on, I made sure that my ruffles started 5 inches up from the waist of my top piece. This way they look very level and even, instead of if we just kind of willy-nillied it and then maybe our one ruffle started up here and the other started down here and it looked really weird. So I measured 5 inches up from the waist of my top piece, and that's where my ruffle began. Once those were stitched into place, we're gonna go ahead and iron them out. Now that they've been ironed out, we're getting to kind of the trickiest part of this apron, which is finishing the straps. Now, you could do this by hand, but since I was making 3 aprons, I didn't want to do that much blind stitching, so I finished this with my machine. Using the seam that we made on the top piece as a guide, I went ahead and ironed over my 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides of my strap, starting with the one that was attached to my top. So I'm ironing that seam allowance over, and once I have that entire side of my strap complete, I'm going to fold over the other side, and then I'm going to do the same thing, folding over my seam allowance, pressing it into place, and then pinning it. Now I can go from the right side of my material using my presser foot as a guide and top stitch as close as possible to the edge of my strap to hopefully hold everything together. Now, this is kind of tricky. I definitely had to seam rip some of it, and some of it I'm still gonna have to hand sew because I didn't quite catch my other seam allowance. So you're gonna wanna go kind of slow and steady on this, and it might take a few tries. So if you're only making 1 apron, I might suggest just blind stitching this by hand. But again, I was making 3, and in the honor of time and not wanting to spend forever blind stitching, I used my machine. Now that the top of our apron is pretty much finished, we can go ahead and add a waistband. We're going to take our final 3.5 inch strip, fold that in half, and iron it into place. Now we're going to stitch along the entire raw edge and then turn that inside out, creating a nice long tube. Once we've created that tube, go ahead and iron it flat again, making sure that the seam allowance is on one of the edges rather than being hidden. You want it to be on one of those edges. So now that you have this really long tube, we are going to mark the center of it and match that up with the center of our top piece. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and seam rip part of that tube open. You're going to want to seam rip enough of that tube open so that you can slip in your top part of your apron and then top stitch that closed to hold everything together. Once you've connected the waistband to the top piece, we're going to do the same thing for the straps on the apron. The Mew Mew straps do not overlap in the back, so we are going to want to make sure that our waistband fits our waist perfectly, and then as close to the edge of our waistband as we can get, we're going to want to attach our straps. I definitely suggest either using a dress form or trying it on at this point to make sure that you don't make your straps too long or too short. So once we've seam ripped that part of our waistband open, go ahead and top stitch it into place. Now we can move on to the heart. The heart is probably the most exciting part of this apron. It's what makes it distinctively Mew Mew and not just any other maid uniform. So previously, we cut out 2 copies of our heart pattern. We're going to take one of those copies right now and just lay it onto our table. After that, we're going to take a rectangle of cotton that is about 1.5 times as wide as our heart and about just as tall, and you're going to run a ruffle stitch on both edges of that rectangle. We're going to ruffle this together so it just about fits on top of our heart piece. Now I'm going to take this over to my iron and press these ruffles into place. Once they've been pressed into place, we're going to pin them around the edge of our heart. Now you can adjust this ruffle as much as you want. I didn't want mine to be super duper ruffly. I just wanted it to be enough ruffle that you could tell that there was some dimension to it. If it was too ruffly, we would run into the same issue as having a pillow where it would just add a lot of bulk and maybe not look as streamlined or as nice as if we had just a little bit of ruffle. So now that that ruffle is pinned around your heart, go ahead and stitch it on with a basting stitch. Now you can trim off all of that extra seam allowance and now you have just a beautiful ruffly heart. But there's not enough ruffles yet. Now it's time to add ruffles around the outside of the heart. Using the 4-inch wide by 44-inch long strips that we cut at the beginning of the video, we're going to stitch those together on all sides so it creates a giant circle. Next, you're going to want to iron all of that in half, and we're going to run a couple basting stitches along the raw edges. The reason we're making this a circle is so that there's no raw edges that we have to deal with once we're adding the ruffle to our heart. This way, it's just one big ruffle and we can easily see where each half of the ruffle is, and we can match that up with our heart as well to make sure our ruffle is at least somewhat even. So we have run a basting stitch all the way along the raw edge of this strip, and now we are going to begin to ruffle. Not gonna lie, this part took the longest since there's just so much material here to ruffle. This is 88 inches of fabric that we are just shrinking down into, I don't know, maybe 22 inches, maybe? I didn't measure. Anyway, so we're going to ruffle, 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 and once it's about the same size as our heart, we're going to take the 2 seams of our ruffle where we connected our pieces together. You're going to put one at the top where the heart creates the little dimple, and one at the bottom where you have the point of the heart. This way your ruffle is even around both sides. Now we're going to pin our entire ruffle all the way around, making sure it's nice and cute and kind of even, etc., etc. Now we're going to stitch that into place. Once that's been stitched into place, we are nearly finished. We just need to sandwich our other heart piece on top and stitch around most of the edge. I'm gonna leave about 4 inches wide on one of the straight edges of my heart. This way we can turn it inside out. Of course, before you turn it inside out, make sure to clip your seam allowance and clip into your curves, especially that point at the center top, so that way everything will lay flatly. So we're gonna turn this inside out and iron it flat. And now you have an absolutely adorable heart for your apron. With our heart and our top both made, it's now time to connect them together. I'm going to do this by hand, just because I want to keep the inside of my aprons really, really clean. So I'm simply going to go ahead and do a little bit of hand stitching to connect my heart to my apron at the waistband. You could also do this by machine if you wanted, by simply stitching in the ditch along the ruffle of your heart. Once our heart is connected, we're going to finish off the back of our apron. Again, making sure everything will fit you properly, you're going to want to fold in the inside of your waistband and create a nice clean edge with a blind stitch, and then you're going to add either a snap or a hook and bar. I'm using snaps just because I have a bunch of them and I think they're really easy to put on by yourself, whereas hooks and bars, I would probably need some help to put them on behind my back. Now that our closure's in place, our apron's pretty much ready. The last thing to add is a giant bow. Now for our uniforms, we are using the Sparkle Pipsy bow pattern that she uses for her Sailor Moon uniforms. We're going to use this for the big bow in the back. And then we're also going to use a waterfall tail pattern as the tails. I've talked about waterfall tails before, so I'm not going to go into super depth. All I did was cut 2 pieces of my pattern, stitch around the edges, flip it inside out, press it, smack it on, and we're good to go. I hand stitched my bow onto my waistband at center back, and then I also hand stitched one edge of my bow onto the side of the waistband. This way it'll keep everything nice and perky. For the other side, I used a snap to connect the edge of the bow to the waistband of my apron. Again, this will just keep everything perky, so I don't have to worry about my bow falling over. Now, if you didn't want to attach the edges of your bow to your apron, you could also use a chopstick to help keep everything in place. But I find that stitching it on makes sure it's always in place and I don't have to worry about it at all. And now that we have our giant, adorable butt bow in place, our Mew Mew apron is complete. I think that these aprons are super duper cute. Like I said, I didn't originally love this design, especially when translated into real life. I thought it could look really clunky, but it's actually adorable. I think it might be the cutest thing I've ever made, honestly, and I make a lot of cute things. I am so excited to wear all of these Cafe Mew Mew uniforms with my friends at SactoraCon this year. I think we're going to be super adorable and I can't wait to see everyone and geek out over Mew Mews. Now again, let me remind you that there is a written tutorial on my website, ellieeberts.com, and that has all of the measurements and steps laid out for you with pictures. So if you're more of a visual step-by-step word learner, make sure that you check that out. It should be really helpful for you. Now, if you use my tutorial to make your own Mew Mew uniform, please let me know, tag me in it. I really want to see. Of course, my Instagram handle is @EllieEberts, as is my Twitter. I'm active on both of those, so you can check either of them out and tag me on there. I would love to see your Mew Mew cosplay. Now, of course, if this video was useful for you, make sure you leave a big thumbs up and subscribe for more Mew Mew content. Mew Mew is making a return this year, so I'm sure that's going to be what 99% of my videos are about, so I hope you're prepared. Until next time, everyone, I hope you have a great day, and make sure to keep sewing, stay positive, and have fun. And of course, for the future of the earth, we'll be of service. Yeah? See you later. Bye!